Welcome to our symposium today, everyone. My name is Justin Price. I am the Director of Partnerships and Special Initiatives for the National Cybersecurity Alliance, Cyber Trust America, and also in NCSA and partner cities and counties welcome you to our annual Cybersecurity Symposium for Smart Cities. This symposium will focus on building back better and more secure in the wake of COVID-19 and damaging cybersecurity incidents. Attendees will hear, as you all heard from the first and few sessions, you will hear, see, and interact around timely digital transformation needs, innovations, and resources for equitable smart cities and communities. We're in week 4, so this week is all about making security a priority as we close out October. For businesses, this means building security into products and processes. For individuals, it's keeping cybersecurity at the forefront of your mind as you connect daily. And then now for cities, it's understanding that you play the most significant role for both the business and the individual. And you hear about that during our session. The first line of defense, the city, is when our communities are under a cyber threat or attacked. How prepared and fast you respond can dictate a city's infrastructure that could either save or destroy sensitive information, or what, or worse, could impact lives. And again, I'm going to introduce again Mayor Steve Schewel, Durham, North Carolina, Michael Dunaway, Assistant Director for Innovation, IoT Devices, and Infrastructure Group at National Institute of Standards and Technology, the long word, but the short word, Nist. And then Lena, Program Director, Urban Innovation at the National League of Cities. So, Mayor, I'm going to start with you first. This is a thing about cities, right? Symposium for cities. Durham last year suffered a malware attack that shut down the city's government services. As the city leader, what plan of preparation did you have in place to respond? And then what were the lessons learned afterwards that you come about?
Justin, thank you a lot. And thank you for having me. And I'm looking forward to the panel. Greetings to my fellow panelists. We did experience a ransomware attack in March of 2020 here in Durham, right at the start of the COVID pandemic. During the attack, we were fortunate that we were able to maintain the functioning of critical systems, including our 911 call center, and fortunately, we did not have to pay a ransom. The potential disruption of an attack like this, you can imagine what it is. I mean, think about our water system. We have 90,000 water customers. We have 25 million gallons a day in water that goes through our pipes. We've got 300,000 calls a year to our 911 system. So the potential for disruption is absolutely enormous. But we were fortunate because we had prioritized the functioning of our critical systems. We had done a lot of cybersecurity planning and preparation. We had an extremely disruptive attack on Durham Public Schools in 2009. And then we had a smaller malware attack on the city networks in 2018. So we were prepared for this one. We were able to resume full network functioning in less than a week after the attack, which we're very pleased about and proud of. But this took a lot of advanced planning. We did have a robust system of cloud backups for city data. We have an immutable backup system, and we back up everything on our city system into the cloud every 2 hours. And then we have partnerships with our vendors, with the FBI, with the North Carolina National Guard that really made a difference in helping us get back up. And so it's expensive is the other thing I should say. The city of Durham spends $900,000 a year on cybersecurity. There are a lot of localities a lot smaller than us that aren't able to do that. And I'd be happy to talk about that at some point in the program as well. But we did have a very disruptive attack. Fortunately, because we were well backed up and we have good partners, it was not anything that we did not have to pay a ransom, and we got back up functioning in less than a week. But we feel very fortunate, and we feel like good planning and our staff had a really good vision for how to do this. And so that's what made it possible for us to survive it.
Mayor, that's one aspect of it, right? You're hearing from it, and then from Director Dunaway, as far as the government aspect of it, I asked Mayor Schewel about the planning phase on that level. but which functions are a must in the planning phase? And what do our Nist experts, say about this in their role with what Mayor Schewel had to do in Durham?
Justin, thank you, and Mayor, thank you very much for the lead-in on this. It's really appropriate for my comments. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Nist cybersecurity framework. Its formal name is the Framework for Improving Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity, but it cuts much more broadly about across all organizations, and the framework itself is useful for everything. So I'll get to that in a minute, but I want to put this in the context of a bit of a story. So right now I'm at Nist. I run a program called the Global City Teams Challenge, which is a smart cities initiative that Nist runs on behalf of the Department of Commerce. And we've got about 150 or so cities and public-private partnerships and communities all across the nation involved in this. Before I took this position, however, a few years ago, I was in the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, and I ran a program there called the Business Emergency Operations Center for the state of Louisiana. And as you might imagine, in Louisiana, emergency operations is a lot about hurricanes and flood management and critical infrastructure protection for water and coastal mitigation. But in 2017, the governor of Louisiana, John Bell Edwards, chartered a cybersecurity commission. And the goal of the commission was to look broadly across the entire state at the private sector level, all the way up to major state infrastructure systems and state organizations. And by virtue of my role in the Business Emergency Operations Center, I was appointed as the chairman of the committee dealing with the public and private, with the private sector outreach to the community. So I got involved in cybersecurity from the perspective of private sector industry. And this was industry all the way up to major telecom and critical infrastructure systems, all the way down to mom and pop operations in towns. And so we worked on writing a strategy for the state's cybersecurity initiative for about 18 months. And then, as some of you may recall, in July of 2019, Louisiana suffered a cybersecurity attack on about it was four initially parish, and those are counties, four parish school board administrations and school systems. And this was about 3 weeks prior to the start of the school year. So we mobilized the Cybersecurity Commission, which was comprised of Louisiana National Guard, the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, a whole range of state agencies and organizations. And then on my part, about 13 major corporate entities that had cybersecurity expertise. And we worked for about 2 weeks, I think, as I recall, to basically clean up what was a ransomware attack on the school board administration and the schools, in order to get the schools back online and the computer systems running prior to the start of school days. And we met that requirement. So we recovered the systems. Okay, so here's the point of this. We had been working together at that point for about 18 months. And we had done a lot of preparation with an unknown threat. But when the threat came around on a statewide initiative, we were prepared for it. And that was a major initiative. The other thing I would point out that we learned was that in Louisiana, cybersecurity is like hurricanes. Everybody is equally affected. Everybody is at risk. Everybody recognizes that they only survive if they coordinate and cooperate among the entire group. So there was a lot of lessons that are appropriate for cybersecurity learned out of what we did. So with that, I'll stop for the story and pick up the cybersecurity end of it for Nist later, a little bit later in the discussion.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael. So you heard from the mayor, you heard from Nist, and now we're going to go to organization, right? Lena, as Director of Urban Innovation at the National League of Cities, what resources does NLC offer to prepare cities for an attack like what transpired in Durham? And you all have done a report recently on cyber at NLC too, as well, on your findings of the ways to prepare, respond, and make sure it doesn't happen again. So what do you all offer?
Definitely. So NLC really sees its role as getting city leaders to understand the risks that cyber attacks can bring, more comfortable even talking about cyber, and up to speed on the available resources that could help promote cyber efforts in their own communities. And this is really the first step in ensuring that cyber is prioritized at the city level, making sure we all have a baseline understanding of the importance of cities acting in this way, and the interconnections of cybersecurity to the daily operations and different lines of businesses that cities are doing. So as you mentioned, Justin, in 2019, NLC released a report, Protecting Your Data, What Cities Should Know About Cybersecurity. And this report really lays out the best way to avoid vulnerabilities and reinforce cyber programs. So I can drop a link in that in the chat with that report shortly. But we've also partnered with a lot of private and public sector organizations like Nist, like the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, the Center for Internet Security, MS-ISAC, CompTIA, the Public Technology Institute. So there's a lot of great resources out there for cities that they might not be knowing to look at, because it is just general good cybersecurity practices. And NLC looks to translate that content, give it the really specific city lens, and really make sure that all our city members have the information that they need, and along with the state municipal leagues in their communities, so they know what they could be doing to protect their communities. We've also taken the lead in advocating for the needs of cities at the federal government. So we know that cities need things like sustainable new funding sources for cybersecurity investments in their communities that don't cannibalize existing programs that they can already use. We know that there's a lot of benefit in doing the active planning and practicing for cyber attacks, just like the mayor and Director Dunaway mentioned, and that there really is a great opportunity for partnerships between the different units of government and making sure that this is happening on a local level. And probably most importantly, we know that there's no one size fits all cybersecurity solution for cities. Cities of all sizes in all areas really need to come up with the practices that work for their own community context, for their own budget, for their own staff capacity to make sure. So really recommend that we give cities the opportunity to make use of the practices that work well for them.
Yep. All right. So audience, we've heard, again, we're going to go back around, right? So town, people, government, with Nist, organization. So let's now go into the vision, right? So let's go back to Mayor Schewel. 2020 was rough for a lot of people out there. We had to switch and move into indoors a lot more. And that rang of being online more, right? Not only personally, but professionally, right? Not all cities and counties include secure digital capabilities in their vision mission. Of course, those that have included have proven wise throughout COVID-19, like I said, with remote working and distance learning. As a mayor, do you think one of COVID's lessons for mayors is to move up secure digital capabilities, right, into their list of top priorities, which is a slew of things that are happening right with your city, but this is one of those where it's maybe not important now, back in the day, but we're have to go up to the times.
Yeah, Justin, thank you. Let me just mention, just so you can think about this for a second. When we had our malware attack and we formed a war room, that was middle of March, 2020. Mm-hmm. So we were pulling everybody together in a war room at the same time as we were telling everybody to socially distance and wear a mask. And you can imagine how hard that was for the people to try to figure that out. I mean, no one, we were in the part of the pandemic when nobody knew a darn thing, and except that we were trying to stay socially distanced, and here we were pulling everybody together in a war room. It was a pretty intense scene there. But to your question, so the vision is one thing. We all need to have a vision that we put out there for cybersecurity, and we all need to put that at the top of our list. You're right. We know that now. There's no question about it. I mean, the city of Durham is being attacked constantly. Every single day, there's multiple cyber attacks on the city of Durham that we have to fend off. But think about this. The United States has thousands of municipal governments. They operate water systems, they operate gas and electric utilities, 911 answering centers, transportation systems, and all kinds of other critical services. And most of these municipal governments are small. 80% of the cities in America have a population of under 50,000 people. So while the city of Durham, which is, I believe we're the 75th largest city in the country, we have the resources to fund cybersecurity. If you're a city of 30,000 and you're running a water system and all other kinds of government functions, the chances that you have the funds to really fund decent cybersecurity is very, very slim. You're competing with cybersecurity funding with providing quality drinking water, maintaining infrastructure, fixing potholes, employing first responders. And cybersecurity expenditures in that context for a small city is really hard. It's really hard to do. So, at the same time, cybersecurity is becoming more complicated and expensive every year for cities. We know that our criminal organizations, including state-backed criminals, are developing sophisticated methods to penetrate public networks and disrupt city functions. And even small town networks are attractive targets for these bad actors. We know that. We've seen those attacks on small cities, and we can no longer rely, I think, on what has sometimes been called security through obscurity. That's not going to work anymore. So even relatively basic steps like implementing multi-factor authentication or conducting cyber hygiene training for city staff and elected leaders and maintaining up-to-date hardware and software can be very costly for a city, and for a small city, it can be nearly impossible. So we really need, we depend in Durham on our partnerships with our vendors, with the state and federal agencies to keep our network safe and to recover from attack. But we really need Congress. We really need federal support. And Lena mentioned this earlier, to bolster these partnerships and provide cities and towns and villages with new resources to strengthen our collective security posture. It's one thing to have the vision, and I know that the cities across America are starting to think about how to do this. It's another thing to have the resources. So I wanted to put that out there because I think that's really going to be an important consideration going forward.
Thank you, Mayor. And then, so I go to you, Director Dunaway. We talked about that vision, and it becomes the trust, right? Any city can maybe declare them as a smart city with the way they do things. And Mayor Schewel talked about a list of things that fall in those buckets of how to prepare for all this stuff. And we'll get into budget and funding a little bit with him later on. But when you have example cities that follow the Nist framework and the guidance, with Mayor Schewel talking about those buckets, they're usually better out, right? As far as following that initiative of, how to be more prepared, and then not only get trust from not only internally with government, but also to community and other stakeholders. So can you comment on that?
Yeah, Justin. In the Global City Teams Challenge, which is the organization that Lon's group is sponsoring this conference through. A few years ago, we started going down the path of trying to define cybersecurity for all of our smart city initiatives. And I think, like most of us that have been involved in smart city initiatives or in city initiatives in general, you start with the technology. So you begin thinking about how the technology, needs to be secured and improved and made transparent, made available to the public, and their interests protected. So you start with the technologies, and then you realize pretty quickly that the technology is actually for something, and the something it is for is to provide information that can be used to more credibly manage the government and credibly and efficiently deliver services to the population. So it's really for the people. So you get to the data systems. And then from there, we began our analysis looking at not just the data, but the decisions that the data was enabling. So we started talking about decision systems and how to secure the decision systems. And farther we went down the line to talking not so much about the decision systems as the decision makers. and what their considerations needed to be in terms of a secure environment and a secure outreach to the community. So we went through this iteration, and we started with technology, we went to data, we went to decision systems, to decision makers, and finally we boiled it all down and it got to the issue of trust. And when you take the cybersecurity issue and you begin boiling it down to the very basic thing that it enables trust, but you also have to have systems that can be trusted. And the data itself must be able to be trusted. And so are the decision systems that enable the decisions that the decision makers make. So the trust component of cybersecurity is really fundamental to everything else that we do in the entire organization, in the entire organizational structure. So let me talk just briefly about the two frameworks. I want to highlight two of them, actually. They're the framework for improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity, or simply the Nist cybersecurity framework, is available online for anybody. It is a common doctrine that can be a doctrine or a document that can be used from any level, from a state or city all the way down to a small business and an organization. And here's the benefit of that. The benefit is that the framework has been written and disseminated across the country. The Gartner technology or engineering firm did a study in 2018 and determined that about 50% of the organizations that had real cybersecurity programs had based it on the Nist cybersecurity framework. And it's that commonality, that common framework, which is translatable from the city level all the way down to individual businesses. That's the real advantage, but it's also a real cost efficiency, because no organization really has to go back and reinvent this structure. It's already provided, and it's actually usable. And it's written in something of a capability maturity model fashion, so that you can start at the bottom and improve through development over time. And that's a real advantage in its own right. So I'll stop with that and turn that over to the next question.
Awesome. Thank you, Director Dunaway. So, Lena, Mayor Schewel talked about Congress, right? You come from the municipality world, most notably Portland, Maine, beautiful Portland, Maine up there. And I've worked at NOC also too, and policy drives a lot of this stuff, right? A lot of this stuff where, NOC is in DC, and so we try to fight for a lot of cities out there. How do we convince other city leaders, right? I know NOC has the ITC, committee, but there are other elected officials that are not on there that may not have this as their radar. How do we convince other city leaders to keep cyber current on the threat landscape? Is it through policy, or worst case scenario, does it have to happen to them in order for them to understand, hey, this is important? So in your mind, what's your estimation?
Yeah, so Justin, as you mentioned, I served as the Director of Innovation for the City of Portland, Maine before joining National League of Cities. And I would say not an insignificant amount of my time was spent translating technical concepts and ideas from the IT professionals to city leaders to be able to make those actionable decisions. So there can really be a big disconnect here in demonstrating the importance of investing in cybersecurity work between those two groups of folks. And I think really that's, before we even get into the policy discussion, that's the first place that we really need to focus. So as is probably pretty clear to this group, cyber threats to cities are really increasing. Between 2018 and 2019 alone, known attacks on local governments rose almost 60%, and the average ransomware demand was over $800,000. So that's significant. But a survey in the report that I linked to earlier found that only about 17% of city respondents said that their local elected officials were engaged in cybersecurity efforts, and 29% of them said that they weren't engaged at all. So really, I think the first step we need to take here is making sure that people are talking about their experiences here, just like Mayor Schewel is doing. Sharing the information of what is happening in your city can really be a great first step there. So it would be a really powerful first step in strengthening cybersecurity practices in other organizations and kind of showing the real world possibility instead of this nebulous cyber attack. So understanding the level of disruption that these attacks can have on your community and really driving that home is a key first step. So we've seen at the National League of Cities, when city leaders get more comfortable in cyber topics and they see what's happening in other communities, they feel empowered to ask questions in their own organizations, make changes, and those types of things. And I would say for all the technical experts in cities, you really have to think through demonstrating how your cyber security investments really support the rest of the work in your organization. It's not making tech investments for the sake of tech. It's really enabling city operations and ensuring that your organization is being a good steward of public data, sometimes really sensitive data as well. So certainly there are policies that can be supportive here, but really we're not going to mandate our way out of this problem, and requirements from the federal governments or others on cities need to come with some supportive funding to make sure that these requirements and policies can be put into practice in our local governments.
Thank you, Director Geraghty. You said an important word: technical experts. Technical experts, which is huge for a city, right? All the things, all the facets of that, right? And so I think about that, and I think about Mayor Schewel funding for that, all of that. How does that work? How does that process even get to be in the planning phase of this? And so, you know, we talked about this prior to our conversation today, how Durham was prepared for this, right? And we've always talked about too, or we talked about some cities may not be prepared for the technical expert or had the funding for the technical expert for an attack. So how do you make sure, your advice to other mayors out there, that there's adequate planning for security, for funding, for budgeting purposes, just in case this does happen to your city?
Sure. Well, I think for cities, as I say, the size of Durham, we have resources to put to this, and we know the importance of it. And I think that for other large cities, it's increasingly clear that we have got to prepare ourselves by doing some adequate funding. And that's going up every year, as it should. We need to be putting more resources into this. And we certainly, every time we have an incident like the one we had, we learn other things that we can do to be prepared. But I want to emphasize, I think that there are a lot of cities in America. There are thousands of cities in America that are small and don't have the resources to do it. And I think that one of the things that mayors need to do, and through the League of Cities, this work is already ongoing, is to band together to work to get Congress to do the kind of funding that we need Congress to do for this kind of infrastructure protection. We need a sustainable new funding source without, and as Lena mentioned, without cannibalizing existing public safety grant programs that can fund cybersecurity efforts. Cybersecurity measures are not a one-time thing. They're ongoing expenses, and so while a one-time grant could get something up and running, it's not going to do what we need for network monitoring and training and upkeep that's got to be budgeted for every year. So I really think that for one of the big jobs of mayors, and especially small town mayors, is to make this known as a need for members of Congress. And part of that also means that Congress needs to be prioritizing intergovernmental partnerships, closer collaboration between cities and counties and states, federal agencies on planning and procurement and training and incident response. That will help reduce the impact of the attacks and the expenses and the time needed to recover. So all that I think will be very important. And I will just add that absent this, I am convinced that smaller towns are going to continue to be successfully targeted by by attacks like this. I don't think there's any question about it. The resources are very slim.
Yes.
If you've got to hire, if you're making a decision between hiring somebody to handle, fixing, making sure your water's clean and there's plenty of it, versus somebody who's dealing with cybersecurity, you know what that decision is going to be. So the budgeting is crucially important, and for larger cities, I think we're getting there. But for smaller towns, we're a long way away.
Director Dunaway, from funding to preparedness now. Again, we're in this digital space more and more because of the pandemic. And it's difficult. I was going to ask you, how difficult is this for cities to even begin in the preparedness space? But we know it's difficult, right? And Mayor Schewel talked about smaller cities. You're going to have to make tough decisions. But as you make these tough decisions, in your seat, what attacks should cities be looking more in depth now that we're indoors still? We're still doing a lot of the work inside. A lot of people don't think about MFA or things of that nature. So what should cities be looking at in more in depth?
Yeah, complex question. So I was just, excuse me, I was just responding on the chat to somebody's question. And I can tie in, the answer I gave was the web link for the Nist cybersecurity framework is important. So I think somebody else posted that. I did not. And I recommend that you conduct a Google search, for those of you interested, on the Nist cybersecurity frameworks. Really straightforward. And the reason I say that is because along with the federal document, which you'll pull up, you're going to find a whole bunch of templates and frameworks that are developed by other organizations. And these are private sector organizations that have expertise in cybersecurity or who have businesses that probably look a lot like yours. And you can look at these, most of them, you fill out an address sheet and you're now networked in with a link. But the main point is you can pull down a document, and there are a lot of resources online, but there are resources everywhere. And this is where I think towns in general, I'm speaking in generalities here because I'm not a city manager. We tend not to think that our neighbors know something that we don't know. Or we're not certain that they have a resource that we need because we've never actually asked. My experience in Louisiana when I was down there was that there was talent all over the place, but it had never actually been mobilized. So I think the first responsibility for cities, this is why I think a federal framework like the NIST framework is an important starting point, because if that is used by the city and the city proposes that organizations and other agencies use it as well, and through their Better Business Bureau, through their Chamber of Commerce, through their Economic Development Administrations, they all use the same template. They're all beginning to work collectively towards the same goal. And it's that collective nature, the collaboration and the building of a team at the community level that is really the strength. And in doing that, you will find expertise that you probably didn't know you had. This was certainly what I saw in Louisiana. I think other organizations have seen much the same thing. And a lot of times you find people who have just a general interest in cybersecurity that have done really genuine research and maybe are coders that can actually help with security systems, but again, have never been asked. So they don't know that there is a need. They don't know who to contact. So it's a really collaborative effort that I think is the real strength that needs to be emphasized.
Thank you. My last question for the group. So Director Lena, I hate to use the word fear, but don't know if fear is the right word, but again, these things are real. It's preparing for, COVID that a lot of cities have tried to do in the short term, and then now to the long term, other policy issues that they have to deal with on an everyday basis. And then on top of that, again, we talked about how we're now frequently inside, both personally and professionally. And so you working with this ITC community, and I'm sorry, I should say what that means. It's National League of Cities Information Technology and Communications Committee at NLC, which is up to about 50 elected officials across the country talking about the things that we're talking about today. And so, you know, Director Dunaway I asked him about the attacks that cities should be looking for more in depth. What are some of the fears that you're hearing maybe in that committee or also largely around NOC that the next cyber attack that they not be prepared for? And also I'm asking you this too, as somebody that used to work in city government with Portland, Maine, you know, what you're hearing on the ground that maybe elected officials are mostly afraid of.
So I really think it's a lot of fear of the unknown here. The evolution of cyber incidents has really rapidly progressed from just like a network being down to really sophisticated attacks intended to threaten both the health and safety of our nation's citizens and our communities. You know, the attacks on water treatment facilities, pipelines, hospital systems, food processing plants, school districts are really clear evidence that cyber incidents disrupt our daily lives and can jeopardize our communities. And ultimately, a cyber criminal only has to be right one time, whereas a city government or local leader has to be right every single time to protect a city system. And so I think that can kind of elevate the level of stress when it comes to this situation. But what we're hearing and recommending to city leaders is really taking kind of almost an emergency management approach to preparing for cyber attacks. So like Director Dunaway said, thinking of it as a natural disaster in Louisiana really helped expedite the ability and really lessen the amount of fear that folks were experiencing by using a commonly known framework and really empowering city leaders about like what actions they can take, what steps for each different type of situation depending on the level of cyber attack. So we really are hopeful that knowledge through education and practice and training can lessen the amounts of fears, which are certainly very real given a lot of the most recent cyber attacks we've seen.
Awesome. Well, panel, this was awesome. From Mayor Schewel, again, unfortunate that your city had to endure that last year in the wake, like you said, of March of last year, when we were trying to figure out this huge thing, and then you have an attack on your city as well online. But kudos to you in the city for being prepared, knowing how to respond quickly, adequately, and look what happens on the long run. You learn the lessons and then are more prepared for the attack, and that's helping the city of Durham out for the future of its leadership. Director Dunaway, thank you again for giving us the framework of what Nist is truly helping, not only for cities, communities, but also for things of collaboration across agencies, because that's important. And lastly, Director Lena, again, I know you're new in the NOC realm, but you're still, as far as the wisdom coming from city government to now helping all cities across the country, those things help out tremendously and a great asset to NOC. And so, again, I thank the panel so much. Again, I thank our Smart Cities team that is putting this together. And last but not least, learn a lot of this knowledge, not just the experts, but also from yourselves, the experiences that can help benefit not only the city, but also the community that's in within too. So again, I'm Justin Price, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Justin.
Thanks a lot. Enjoyed it. Appreciated being here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.